Quick disclaimer. I've added 5 numbered white screens throughout this video that say addendum at the top. They appear for about a second, then disappear. They contain minor corrections and explanations. I'm adding over 5 years after originally making this video. They're not essential. They're mostly for my own peace of mind, so don't feel obligated to pause and read all of them or any of them. That goes for the many other written footnotes as well. If you do have the urge to read them though, keep in mind they don't exactly help the pacing, so consider watching all the way to the end first, then going back to read them after. Anyway, 2025 me will shut up now. Sorry for this weird structure. I hope you enjoy the video. So, in this video, we're talking about Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. Well, eventually, but we're not quite ready to talk about it yet, because this is a really weird movie by a really weird director who often gets associated with a wider group of really weird directors. And if we're going to understand this weirdness here, it's going to be so much easier to start with a little of this outer weirdness and work our way in. Who is this group of weirdos Tarkovsky gets associated with? Transcendental cinema. This is an academic grouping, not an official self-acknowledged one. Basically, there are these filmmakers from all over the world who worked mostly in seclusion of one another, making very slow, meditative movies with little to no action or drama. They all enjoyed periods of time where nothing happens. And some much more than others. But what makes things interesting is that all these filmmakers happen to be very religious, or at least very much interested in religion. And the reason for that connection seems to be much deeper than just all religious people are slow and boring. Many of these filmmakers were highly original inventors with their own totally unique cinematic techniques and styles. But many of their original techniques can be seen to serve some of the same common goals, like a tendency towards extreme minimalism. Ozu famously used the exact same camera angle and lens for every shot in every movie, and repeated the same camera setups over and over again. Bresson tried to totally eliminate acting from his films. He would hire untrained actors and ask them to give as flat a line reading as possible. Tu l'aimes? À vous. Then he would still force them to do 50 takes of the same line, so that by the end of it they were totally exhausted and talked as if they were almost dead. Tu l'aimes? À vous. Which brings us to another common goal, distance. Instead of using tricks to get us more involved with the emotions and drama, they were inventing tricks to try to stop the audience from getting too involved. They wanted our engagement with the movie to be more distanced and meditative, which when done well could sometimes turn into a kind of hypnotic trance. Like in this movie where for like 15 minutes I am just so entirely focused on this guy walking back and forth with a candle. Or this one where for 40 minutes they go through the entire process of making a bell, and it's seriously one of the most engaging things I've watched in my whole life. This engagement comes from heading in the exact opposite direction of most modern movies, which try to constantly assault the audience with new information, keeping us constantly thinking and moving our eyes to read each new image. If the regular length of a shot is increased, one becomes bored. But if you keep making it longer, it piques your interest. And if you make it even longer, then a new quality emerges, a special intensity of attention. If the movie makes us think a new thought every half second, then we're only half a second away from always living in the present, which means we're pretty engaged. But if instead the movie can slow our thoughts down until they've stopped, then we'll actually be living in the present, which is as engaging as it gets. But when the filmmaker wants to do this, he can't let our minds wander, so he needs a simple object of anticipation. Like a hypnotist using a swinging pendulum, he shows us a bell or a candle. Something to focus on with consequences a dog could understand. Not complex motivations, betrayals, ticking time bombs. Nothing we have to think about. We should be like dogs stalking a squirrel. That's focus. But there's so much these filmmakers seem to be sacrificing. Complex action, drama, big emotion. It's almost like they want to suck all the excitement and humanity out of their movies. At least the romantic, passionate, tragic, hilarious side of humanity, which is really what most art is about, right?
Ti piace ridere? Но мне не нравится смеяться. Есть люди, которым нравится смеяться. Когда я смеюсь, мне почему-то возникает ощущение...
Oh my god, he hates laughter.
Вообще слезы, как в принципе, всегда эгоистичны.
And crying too, apparently.
Слезы — это, между прочим, такой воплощенный символ эгоизма.
He's not interested in laughter, tears, or anything human, so what's even left to make art about? And that brings us to the big common goal, transcendence. But what does it mean? Well, in a sense, it's the opposite of humanity. It's what happens when you escape selfhood or the ego. If you're thinking about the Buddha and psychedelic drugs, you're on the right page. It's also associated with things like nature, death, meditation, universal love, sacrifice, and yes, God, who I want to say one quick thing about so we fully understand transcendence. There's a transcendent and non-transcendent view of God. The totally transcendent view is best summarized by the philosopher Wittgenstein, who said the truest religion would be a silent one. The idea being that God is so almighty, infinite, and incomprehensible that any attempt to describe him with words would necessarily be a lie. And the non-transcendent view could be summarized by Nietzsche, who said, "I could not believe in a God that does not dance." Think of the ancient Greeks who made gods that were just like themselves, who fought, drank, and had sex, in order that they could celebrate what is human as something divine. For Tarkovsky, that's basically what most art is doing, and that's why he hates it. What constitutes a masterpiece in the West? It is always the cry of the human soul which expresses 1,000 desires. Look how happy I am. Look how unhappy I am. Look how I suffer, how I love, how I struggle, how I perish, how I prevail. In other words, me, 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 me. For him, only the transcendent and spiritual and worthy of art. Which probably makes him a bit extreme and a bit of a limited person. But I think his being extreme is what allows him to make such pure and beautiful movies. Now, before finally actually talking about Stalker, I want to mention two quick things that separate Tarkovsky from other transcendental filmmakers. First, Mr. Me, 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 you actually made a movie that was just a series of your own memories. Actually, you insert your own dreams, memories, and favorite paintings into just about every movie. It might be the most unique and remarkable thing about your filmmaking. The way your films follow the logic of your almost random poetic and personal associations. In other words, me, 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 me. Tarkovsky has an interesting excuse, though. He thinks by taking inspiration from his own dreams and memories, he thinks his films can mimic the way we all think, dream, and experience our own memories. And unlike a movie structured around a plot, which always has us thinking what's going to happen next, he thinks his way shouldn't disrupt our meditative trance, but rather, his films should flow smoothly and thoughtlessly through our minds as our own memories do. And maybe that's true if we all think and dream just like Andrei Tarkovsky. I am firmly convinced of one thing, that if an author is moved by the landscape chosen, if it brings back memories to him and suggests associations, then this will in turn affect the audience with particular excitement. And sometimes he's absolutely right. And other times I'm like, what is happening? Why is this woman floating? Why is he showing me all these bad paintings? Like meditation, all transcendental films are a very fragile, easily disrupted experience. And because of what we just said, Tarkovsky's are even more so than others. If the situation isn't right or you're not relating to it, it can be some of the most confusing, boring stuff ever. But when it's working for you, it really works. The other thing I want to say about Tarkovsky in particular, the guy loves nature, which like we said goes hand in hand with the transcendent, but doesn't nearly get as much screen time with other transcendental filmmakers. And I think Tarkovsky, more than perhaps any other filmmaker, knows how to make nature transcendental. He can shoot it so it's something new and surprising, almost like we're looking at an alien planet. Often he does this by getting close and cropping things in ways so we're not quite sure what we're looking at. This is important because every inch of nature is entirely unique and infinitely complex, and every single tree is its own unique, indescribable shape, but so often we glance at nature for just a second and think, trees, and remember a bunch of green triangles.
E tu come ti poni nei confronti del mondo?
Я не столько думаю по поводу нее, сколько стараюсь ощущать ее. Я к ней отношусь...
By making nature something we can't easily rationalize and putting it in front of us for long periods of time, we're forced to really see it and come face to face with infinity, which forces us out of our thoughts and helps us achieve a meditative trance. And there's also something less concrete that I feel when seeing Tarkovsky's shots of nature. His conviction that nature has a mind of its own.
А вы никогда не думали? Вам никогда не казалось, что растения чувствуют, сознают, может, даже постигают?
It's an explicit theme in more than one of his movies, but even when it isn't, I think it can still often be felt in the way that everything seems to sway and pulsate. It's like his nature breathes. It's another way to stop us from rationalizing. Thinking isn't particularly useful in a world that doesn't follow the normal rules of causation. And that finally brings us to Stalker. Speaking of showing us nature so we don't know what we're looking at, these sand dunes in an underground sewer system, even having seen this image a bunch of times, still don't feel like I really know what I'm looking at here. And obviously we're suspending everyday rationality here as well, which has another special purpose in this movie specifically. The film plays an incredibly interesting game with the audience, and represents a unique experiment amongst Tarkovsky's work, and I believe, films generally. But before we can get to exciting fun stuff like style and experimentation, we have to get ideas and what this movie is about out of the way. Tarkovsky's films are obviously very philosophical, but that doesn't mean they coalesce into one big point, like a sci-fi movie or argumentative essay usually does. His goal is to help the audience become more spiritual, but also to help himself become more spiritual, through the process of making his film, which both is his spiritual struggle and a depiction of it that he can share with others. This means his films are filled with unresolved questions and musings about some subject he is currently struggling with. He actually came to this process through the making of Andrei Rublev, a depiction of Andrei Tarkovsky's struggle to combine his artistic life and struggles with his spiritual life and struggles. He discovers his own spiritual artistic style by making a movie about an artist discovering their own spiritual artistic style. His films often mirror his life in a really direct way. While traveling outside of Russia for a long period of time, he makes the movie Nostalgia, depicting his struggle in being both a universal spiritual being and someone who is very distinctly Russian and unable to relate to people who aren't also super Russian. And Stalker depicts Andrei Tarkovsky's struggle with faith in a world where he believes faith is almost entirely extinct.
Вот в средние века было интересно. В каждом доме жил домовой, в каждой церкви Бог. У них же орган, этот, которым верят, атрофировался. Это зона.
The zone doesn't exist. It's the Stalker himself who invented the zone. In this period of the destruction of faith, what's important to the Stalker is to light a spark, a belief in the heart of people. As if he were a priest of the zone, the Stalker leads men there to make them happy. Tarkovsky insists that all the magic-seeming stuff in the zone could be mundane, perceptual, and psychological tricks played by the Stalker.
Боже мой, это же ловушка.
It's conceivable that the Stalker is leading them on these detours on purpose in order to create a magical atmosphere. Which would make sense because he's trying to put them in the right mindset for the room, which corresponds to an act of faith. And to be clear about what he means, for Tarkovsky, faith is faith. It's a psychological experience that isn't particular to any religious system. In fact, the Stalker is intentionally avoiding old religious terms and stories and instead has invented his own. And instead of terms like God and soul, it's the room, the zone, the meat grinder. These aren't actually places, they're ideas, and they could be anywhere that you gave the proper reverence. But that's easier said than done. It's actually really difficult to enter the room and genuinely believe. And that's what Tarkovsky would like to be able to do.
Зона — это очень сложная система ловушек, что ли. Но в каждый момент она такова, какой мы ее сами сделали, своим состоянием.
The zone is really a mental journey leading up to a leap of faith, so the only thing that can get in the way are the mental traps that the mind creates for itself. And Tarkovsky believes the only way past these traps is to be soft and vulnerable like a child.
А главное, пусть поверят в себя и станут беспомощными, как дети. Потому что слабость велика, а сила ничтожна.
He means we need openness and vulnerability because what gets in our way here is hard things like rigid thinking and pride.
Сопли распускать, молиться. А что дурного в молитве? Это вы из гордости так говорите.
Or what we find out is really going on with the writer who's supposed to be representing Tarkovsky's own personal struggle.
Не пойду я в твою комнату. Не хочу
Дрянь, которая у меня накопилась, никому на голову выливать.
He doesn't believe in himself, he doesn't trust himself, he doesn't feel worthy because he's struggling to love himself or anyone else.
Мне кажется, что я недостаточно люблю себя. Так же, как каждый из нас недостаточно любит себя. Мне кажется, что если бы мы себя любили по-настоящему...
God, you're such a bummer.
Плевал я на человечество.
What allows someone to enter the room is the feeling of their own unconditional worth,
А мне и так хорошо.
combined with the feeling that there's no other way out.
Хороших она пропускает, а плохим отрывает головы.
Не знаю, не уверен. Мне так кажется, что пропускает на тех, у кого надежд больше никаких не осталось.
You gotta be so totally crushed with despair you can barely stand on your own feet. Because if you feel that way, then the room of wishes can actually grant you your deepest desire. Because if you believe in the room, what the room actually gives you is hope. And if that's your deepest desire, the room worked, which makes you believe in it even more, which gives you more hope, which gives you more belief, more hope, more belief, ad infinitum. Now you can never lose hope because there's an infinite positive feedback loop spinning in your brain. An unshakable faith. And the way people like Tarkovsky use that word doesn't have anything to do with accepting or denying facts about the physical or metaphysical world. It's not something contained in a particular belief or thought, but rather it's contained in the overall grammar or shape of your thinking, how your mind moves. It's a kind of mental dance that plays with mystical spiritual concepts like the room, fate, God, etc. in order to create these deep, sometimes life-changing psychological experiences. At first, these symbols are almost totally empty and without meaning. You use them ironically or because somebody told you you're supposed to. But then they become a part of and help to create some incredible experience. And in order so you can hold on to that experience and keep feeling it, these terms become a permanent, inescapable part of your everyday thinking. Now these aren't empty symbols, they mean everything to you. And you can't not believe in them because they have a palpable, undeniable reality within your everyday experience. The room or fate or God is something you feel happening to you every single day. But believing this isn't necessarily claiming anything about anybody else's experience. Whether you think what you're experiencing has metaphysical or ethical implications that everybody else has to agree with is a whole separate issue. That happens outside of faith when you start to conceptualize it and pick it apart. If you're not going there, then you're just discussing psychological experiences and dancing, which isn't rational or irrational. It can look goofy and backwards, but it makes sense when you're doing it. The actions of a man of faith can be totally absurd, not at all rational or thought out. For me, spirituality has always escaped conscious behavior. Ridiculous, displaced actions are a superior form of spirituality. So to a large extent, it really is about being like a child. But that really can connect us to some of the most fulfilling, beautiful things that we often miss even though they're right in front of us all the time. Tarkovsky calls this final image a symbol of hope. Her powers represent new perspectives, new spiritual powers that are yet unknown to us. He's not saying we're going to be able to move cups with our minds. But to really understand this image, we can't just talk about ideas. This movie isn't about discussing spiritual experiences, it's about having them. Tarkovsky steals most of his ideas from Dostoevsky anyway. So where the movie really becomes irreplaceable and interesting is in the style. Not in the philosophical discussions, but the whole 2.5 hours spent walking through a junkyard. And that's really what this movie is, a lot of moving from place to place and a lot of just waiting there. And those times when we're just waiting are some of the best parts of the whole movie. Which brings us to Tarkovsky's experiment in the first half of the film, which doesn't follow his normal poetic association structure, like the second half often does. Instead, the whole first half and parts of the second follow an idea which Tarkovsky said was inspired by Aristotle's Poetics and Aristotle's idea of unities, which is something Aristotle thought made for good Greek tragedy and sounds pretty stupid when applied to movies. Unity of action, unity of place, unity of time. Basically, there's only one thing going on, no location jumps, no time skipping. For Tarkovsky, this means when he cuts to a new shot, it picks up exactly where the last one left off. Nothing is skipped, time is left intact. Like a one-shot movie with less showing off and calling attention to itself. But what really makes this different from a one-shot or real-time movie is that we aren't jumping to other stories or subplots. We can't jump away when things slow down. These three guys going to a room is the whole thing, and we're along for every step of the journey. And when things slow down and they wait, we wait too. These quiet intervals are essential because they're Tarkovsky's chance to hypnotize us. It's not a mistake all these characters are so sleepy. We're being hypnotized and it's meant to help lull us. Along with the incredible soundtrack, the repetitious rail sounds mixes in more and more with the melodyless electronic music. A lot of the movie's soundtrack was intentionally inspired by traditional Taoist ritual music, designed for creating exactly this kind of trance. And again, we have a pretty simple object of anticipation here. We're going to a room that gives us whatever we want, and the whole journey there can feel like watching that bell, but for 2.5 hours. although the mysterious room and zone definitely call for a little more analysis. For most of us, our first instinct isn't to just accept things as miracles. So if our minds have a chance to wander, we might start looking for an explanation, aliens or something. But these hypnotic sequences put our minds back on track. They prepare us for the magic and mystery and help us engage with it as helpless children, just like the Stalker would want. Watching this sequence, I can only think for so long before the rails turn my thoughts into a single chant. The zone. The zone. The zone. The zone. The zone! Oh my god, color footage of a junkyard. And somehow it is a total revelation. And this is where Tarkovsky starts to tap into our spiritual thinking. He's told me nothing, but absolutely blew my mind. That's what I love, how Tarkovsky plays the dual role of hypnotist and magician. He makes us susceptible and then shows us mundane curiosities that become something absolutely magic. We've already mentioned this dual purpose in his use of landscapes, the way they're hypnotic and transcendent, and also something mysterious and outside normal rationality. He also uses the camera to create a mystical atmosphere and imply an unseen presence.
Stalker says to Professor, "Go on, you take the lead."
Идите первый, профессор.
There's a cut, and we then got a point of view shot of what Professor is seeing. You know, he's walking along.
Notice this grass ruffling as if it was stepped on.
And then into shot, there appear Stalker, Professor, and then Writer. So the person whose point of view we thought we were sharing has actually stepped into shot. And what that does, it means that there is this other point of view that it turns out we've been looking through. Whose point of view is it? Well, there's only 3 of them, and they're all accounted for. They're all in shot. So there is this fourth consciousness.
Here the camera seems to try to hide from the writer's sight. Here's some subtle slow motion, which has a much stranger effect in a movie that has done everything it can so far to imitate real time. And here's our sentient nature. The wind doesn't start blowing until writer starts moving towards the room. And what makes me love this even more is how it all sets us up for the Stalker who Tarkovsky is working with.
Если вы вдруг что-то заметите, или даже только почувствуете, что-то особое, немедленно возвращайтесь.
Before this part, we, like the characters, may be doubting the zone.
Надоели все эти гайки с бинтиками.
Without giving us any concrete stakes, Tarkovsky convinces us of the zone's absolute seriousness, just using the atmosphere and performances. And a disembodied voice, which, like the disappearing bird, could be physical or psychological or a trick played by the Stalker, but at the end of the day isn't really worth more than a penny. Nobody's been harmed or even threatened. Maybe the few tanks and bodies from a long time ago, but nothing ever points to any immediate danger. We never see the zone tear anybody to shreds or even scratch someone. And it's not like we ever throw a nut in the wrong place and see a big explosion, like you would expect in just about any genre movie. But the movie still convinces us that the nuts are essential, largely through slow repetition, and our being there for every step along with the characters. I love this part because along with the writer, at this point we've become totally culpable.
Вы бы хоть гаечку туда бросили.
When he suggests that, I think, oh man, great idea, I almost forgot. I mentally participate in the act even though it makes no rational sense. But spiritually speaking, the nut throwing makes perfect sense. It's a religious ritual that Tarkovsky trains us in. Like any ritual, it has no pre-existing concrete stakes, only the stakes that we give it. The more times we do it, the more power it has, until it feels like life and death and our very soul rides on a nut tied to a bandage. And it does if we put it there. And that's what the movie wants us to do, or at least achieve some of the outside the rational seriousness the characters do. And I think another big way the movie pulls that out of us is the incredible, anxious, animal always about to be eaten alive performance by this guy. In every other role in every other movie, Tarkovsky preferred performances that were emotionally repressed, except when his female characters would occasionally burst into weird sexualized temper tantrums. But this guy isn't repressed, he's a raw nerve, and Tarkovsky let it slide this one time because it really works for the movie. Consequently, he's probably the only memorable performance in any Tarkovsky movie. And what makes him work reminds me of the quote, "A man's maturity consists in finding again the seriousness of a child at play." If you were playing Battleship with this guy and he sank your boat, you would actually feel like you were on an exploding, sinking ship. His fear and intensity are absolutely contagious.
Это зона.
And the longer we're with him, the more we absorb it, which is perfect because the big focus of the movie is putting the audience at all times in the Stalker's hands. Tarkovsky and the Stalker are working together to make us more spiritual, and they work so closely together that it can feel like the character of the Stalker is the one directing the film, right? He's in control of the entire journey, and in directing where the characters go, he directs where the audience goes. Also the one saying when we wait, when we have a nap or a poetry break. To a huge extent, everything we see and experience as the audience is what the Stalker wants us to see. In a way, even Tarkovsky's audiovisual backup seems to be exactly what the Stalker would want to show us if he was literally the director of the movie. All of this is just to point out the clever way in which the movie is a narrative of itself. Transcendental films, especially those by Tarkovsky and Bresson, are all guided spiritual journeys where the director tries to lead the audience into having a religious experience. These films don't want to tell stories because that's only a distraction from what they're trying to achieve. The fact that they need to use some narrative and some drama just to keep the movie together is seen as a necessary evil by these directors, because it means the film is stylistically at odds with itself, working in two different directions. But Tarkovsky found two different solutions to this problem in his two best films. In The Mirror, he almost completely did away with narrative by taking the poetic association thing to its extreme. And in Stalker, he made the spiritual journey and the narrative the same thing, both of them building up to the same religious experience Tarkovsky wants us to have. The journey the Stalker takes the characters on through the zone is a transcendental film and a transcendental film. That means instead of sacrificing one thing or the other to solve the conflict, we make them work together and get to do both things at once. This is where I think the movie offers us something that no other movie does. It's an adventure film where we actually get to go on the adventure. It takes us through a spiritual journey in our heads, while the characters in the movie go on the exact same journey, which makes the journey in our heads way cooler because now it's all an adventure through the zone. And we're just as much in the zone as the characters are because really it's all in their heads too. It's really just an idea. Physically, they're only walking through a junkyard. We're having an almost identical experience in the theater, just our experience is a lot cleaner. Watching this movie is only a tiny bit less cool than actually having this guy walk us through a junkyard and do magic tricks and sermons for us all day. I think what a person normally goes to the cinema for is time. For time lost or spent or not yet had. He goes there for living experience. And this movie really offers a very full and deep one. And in taking us on the adventure, the movie doesn't just make any mundane stuff magical, it makes our lives and our own experiences something magical. And if we're lucky, we may even take some of that magic home with us. That's definitely what Tarkovsky wants because he lets us go on part of the adventure that the characters don't get to go on. And it's the most important part. The thing everything is leading up to. We get to enter the room. While the characters sit outside, the camera flies in. Now we, the audience, are in it. Not just the one in the movie, but the real one, which can be anywhere. In this time, what do we think about? Do we wonder about our own deepest desire? Do we wonder whether we could actually believe? Do we sit there and try to believe in it? But our minds don't get to wander long because this is another hypnotic experience. In whatever state we were in, our minds leave us and we meet with the infinite. And if we're lucky, we do so with a little love and a little hope. And that's it, you were in the room. Did it do anything? Are you different than you were before? I believe that's what the final image of the movie is supposed to answer. When you see this, do you see it with a newfound hope? If so, congratulations, you now actually have superpowers. Go throw some mountains.